Good evening and welcome once again to We Rise, brought to you by the Urban League of Greater Miami. And I'm T. Willard Fair, your host. Glad to be with you this evening. My guest, LaShonda West, is not going to be able to make it with me this evening, but she's coming back next uh, Tuesday, and we will end up election day talking to her. She had to take care of some of her other duties. She's a wife, a teacher, and a mother. And she has some mother duties that came before being with us today. But she'll be here next week, and we'll look forward to having the conversation with her on the election day, the last day for us to vote for the person or persons of our choice, for us to be identified with the party of our choice. So we'll talk about specifics next week. I'm going to talk about things that lead up to what we're going to talk about next week. But first of all, I got this hat on. It's called The Power of Water. Your water comes from the Everglades. Several months ago, a group came to visit with me from the Everglades Foundation, and they wanted us to support them in educating the people of our Re-Rise village about saving the Everglades. Going forward, they recognize that things are going to take their natural course, and because they have no control over what God does with that environment and those circumstances, they are preparing the community and everybody at large to understand that they're going to be going before the legislature. They're going to be asking the legislature to allocate certain funds in order for us to save the Everglades. It's important. That is the primary source of all the water that we drink. So it's important for us to be part of any effort to preserve that natural resource. But I said to them that in the village, we are concerned about the children. And one of the concerns that we have about the children is a piece called the health of the children. And every year we produce this with the cooperation of Jesse Trice, which is a thorough examination of all of the health issues that are associated with the children in Liberty City. It's important for us to have this document because we know that there's a direct correlation between the health of the children and their ability to perform in the classroom, their ability to go beyond that which is expected of them based on their health conditions. So we are interested in doing those things that will preserve and educate the community about the health needs and the health values of the children that we serve and we're concerned about. So we said to them that why don't we do this? Why don't we run a campaign in Liberty City with billboards, with bus benches, with advertisements, talking about the power of water? Because I have learned over the last few years, and do it before I began to get involved intimately with the children in my classroom, that what you eat or don't eat determines how you behave on your way to school, once you get to school, and while you are in school. And to validate my concerns, I volunteered at the first of the month to bag groceries at one of the stores in Liberty City, just to get evidence that my parents may or may not be buying the right things for their children. I was absolutely correct. The sugar, the salt, the things that they were buying, the fast food things, the instant things that you can fix on your own, became very, very aware to me that that's what their children were consuming. So no one should be surprised that when they come to the classroom, they're not able to sit up, they're not able to stay awake, they're not able to behave or sit still, simply because of the fact that they do not have the right kinds of vitamins, the right kind of nourishment that gives them the kind of stamina that they need in order to focus and behave accordingly to the expectations of the teacher. So I was convinced that we had to have a campaign that talked about eating right, to live right in order to be right in order to be successful. Water is important. You can drink wine, you can drink juice, you can drink all of the other liquids, but there is nothing like water. In fact, water is mentioned more times in the Bible than prayer, than religion. It is mentioned almost 800 times in the Bible. So evidently, the God that we serve understood the value of water. It can drown you. You are baptized in it. You're a Christian by it. So water is powerful in all circumstances, both naturally and religiously. So I said to my guests from the foundation, why don't we create this campaign? Now, they really didn't want to buy into that because they came simply to say, why don't we cooperate with them and just educate the Everglades about us, and that we would be educated by them about the Everglades. But I said, no, we're not going to do what you want to do unless doing what you want to do gets us to where we want to be. After a few discussions, we were non-budgeting in that whole process. They said, okay, we'll try. Went out, raised some money. We started a campaign to raise money to make sure that we had enough resources to run a real meaningful educational campaign about the power of water. The campaign. Well, we didn't suggest that they start a campaign, but we also made a large contribution to the campaign. We didn't want them to come to think that we were simply going to be used or try to use them in terms of achieving our goal. But if we had a common goal, we recognized that it was our goal also, and we had an obligation and a responsibility to make a contribution. Ooh, that might have surprised them, because normally when they come to us, we simply have hands out, no hands going forward. But that's not the way we do business. If we want to change things, then we got to be able to make the sacrifice ourselves to make the change ourselves. And if somebody wants to help us, then fine. But if they don't, we ought to do whatever we have to do in order to make the change. So we made a contribution. Guess what? Out of this effort, they then decided to hire a fundraiser to assist them in raising money. Guess what? They hired a fundraiser who looks like me. So we decided that this makes sense, and they decided that in order for it to really make sense, they would hire somebody who looks like us to raise money to run a campaign for the children who look like us. We went forward, and as the campaign rolled out, there were other issues that came up. And guess what? They had a law firm that was a Black-owned law firm to assist in interpreting and negotiating those issues that were important to educating folks about the importance of the Everglades going forward. So we got a campaign going. We got 2 minority persons employed who never would have been employed had we not drawn the line and said that we will do what you want us to do if doing what you want us to do benefits what we want to get done ourselves. Great campaign kickoff. Look forward. It's in Liberty City. Your water comes from the Everglades. It's called the Power of Water. The Power of Water. It'll be on bus benches. It'll be on the side of the buses going through Liberty City. We're going to promote this as an important issue because we're saying to the community at large that water is important. And now we're saying water is important. And as we say water is important, we're also educating children. So stay on the lookout for the bus benches. Be supportive of what we're doing. Make sure that your children drink plenty of water. Make sure that you drink plenty of water. Plenty water. You can't drink too much water. You can drink too much alcohol. You can drink too much soda, but you can't drink too much water. The power of water is unbelievable. In your best interest to understand and consume as much of it as is humanly possible. Power of water. The power of family is another issue that I want to share with you before I get into politics. Just got back from North Carolina, Winston-Salem, which is my hometown, place that I was born. visit my old high school, visit my old elementary school, visit my old church, visit all of my old friends who are still alive and living in Winston-Salem. Had just a grand time, but at the pinnacle of the mountaintop of my time in North Carolina is the time that I spent with my nieces and nephews. Had 5 generations of nieces and nephews to a big shindig, and I was the host. I was the grandpa. I was the uncle. I was the daddy. I was all of those things to my nieces and nephews. 5 generations of fairs in one hotel. And boy, did we have a ball. 5 generations of fairs. Nobody on welfare. Everybody employed. Everybody finished high school. 3/4 went to college. Everybody is doing well. A couple of my nephews have houses that if they were in Miami, they would be in Coral Gables or some other aristocratic area of this community. The power of family. The power of families of color who believe that you can achieve in spite of circumstances. And they achieved simply because they were in an environment where the adults to whom they belonged to demanded that they achieve. They achieved because they saw people who looked like them haven't achieved. And I was just pleased as punch to be able to be with them as the elder statesman of those who were there, and to be able to say that family can succeed in spite of, if not because of color. That you can be whatever you want to be if you decide to make the sacrifices that are necessary in order for you to be whatever you want to be. So I had a chance to simply say to my nieces and nephews that the things that we're trying to do in the village, I can do those things. I know I can do those things because you're evidence that they can be done. You sit here with your uncle, having come out of an environment of adults who demanded that you be somebody, who supported you as you became somebody, who then celebrated you when you became somebody. So we know that it works, but it was just good to be home at a moment of time in this history of mine, to be with my nieces and nephews and their children. So if you tune in, family, here's old Unc down here in Miami talking about you. Bless you, love you, and I'll be back before the year is out to make sure that we continue the celebration. Thank you. Now let's talk about what's going on this evening. As we said way back when, we were going to talk about elections. It's election time. We got one more week to vote for the person or persons of our choice. We got one more week to decide whether or not inflation is real or imaginary. We got one more week to make a distinction between whether or not we believe what the Democrats say or whether or not we believe what the Republicans say. We got one more week to talk about Roe versus Wade, whether or not we ought to make abortion a decision made by the person or a decision made by the people. We got one more week to decide whether or not we're going to be able to survive another pandemic, or whether or not we're going to send any more money to Ukraine. We got one more week to make all these tough decisions. Boy, this is an exciting time for all of us. But how exciting is it for people who look like me? I've been watching how they have attempted to entice us to vote for them. As I have looked at the commercials, as I have done the research on the issues, as I have attempted to educate myself to be an informed person, uh, I would say I have concluded that 300 plus years after our emancipation, too many of us are still on the plantation. We are not being, quote unquote, challenged. We're not being educated. We are manipulated in the whole process. So we've gone from the plantation to manipulation. Uh, People don't understand how important it is for us to understand how important it is for us to be educated in this process. We talk about voter participation. So I raise the question, first of all, what are the issues that are important to us besides just participating? We have died to participate. We have sacrificed to participate. I just remembered way back in 1963 when my colleagues, John Lewis, Jose Williams, SCLC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, marched from Selma to Alabama in protest of the right to vote. They went over that great bridge, that Selma Bridge that leads from Selma to Birmingham, Alabama. Boy, I couldn't make that one. I just finished graduate school in 1963, didn't have a job, was ashamed to ask my mother to give me Greyhound bus fare to go to a demonstration in Selma, Alabama. But I watched it on TV, and I wish I could have been there because I knew what was at stake in that whole process. But I didn't make it in 1963. But as the God I serve would have it, I came on to Miami, got a job, I did what I was supposed to do. Couldn't be there in 1963, but fought like the devil to make sure that every Black person in Miami knew that if I had been there, I would have behaved the way I was behaving in Miami. So because I was non-traditional in my behavior in Miami, I got the attention of those who were in Alabama. I got 1,000 of these things around here. This is the most significant one. This is a plaque. It says, presented by Selma, Alabama, key to the city, James Perkins Jr., mayor. I didn't make 1963, but because of my aggressiveness, my outspokenness in Miami from 1963 when I got here to 1965, the first Black mayor of Selma, Alabama, invited me to be a keynote speaker at a workshop he had in Selma, and I got the key to the city. I will always cherish this because the God that I serve said that you didn't make it, but here's your reward for the work that you did in spite of not having made it. So I was there, and I'm here today. And I would hope that as we talk about voter participation, that we would understand what happened to John Lewis and others as they fought to make voting a privilege and a right for us as citizens. I would hope that having come off the plantation, we ought not be still subjects to manipulation. I would hope that as we prepare to participate in this election process, that we would not allow ourselves to be continually insulted by those who simply manipulate our emotions. I think it's outright ridiculous. shameful, and embarrassing that President Barack Obama, in the witch hour of the moment, would come out to try to convince those of color, primarily, that they need to vote for a certain person or a certain party. I think that's just racist in its rawest form. I think that we should not allow him to manipulate us. But he is. Don't tell me that he's not. When you look at the audiences that he is espousing his rhetoric to, all I see is black people. All I see is black people. All I see is words and slogans and phrases that will emotionally move you in one direction. But I have not yet seen anybody say to him that we don't need you to come out of retirement to tell us what we should be doing. How dare you insult our intelligence? You talk about Kamala Harris. Well, that was an insult to us because she was selected, certainly not because of her intellect, certainly not because of her oration, certainly not because of her understanding of the complex issues of government. She was simply selected because she was black. That is an insult. And we should be outraged by it, but we are so easy to be manipulated that if you just say it's because they are colored, they don't have to be intelligent, they don't have to be anything but colored. That was an insult. Barack Obama comes out, he comes out in the witching hour, and to say to black folks, listen to me, listen to me, vote for the Democratic Party. Well, why should we vote for the Democratic Party? Because he said vote for the Democratic Party. He didn't say vote for the Democratic Party because of, and if you vote for the Democratic Party, this is going to happen. There is no quote unquote black agenda in 2022. There is no specific item or issue on the ballot that is quote unquote clearly going to impact positively on us. So why would we allow people to simply to convince us to do things by using instruments of color that look like us to do those things? Insulting. I wonder what would have happened if some white person had invited the great-great-grandson of George Wallace to mobilize Democrats or Republicans. Wouldn't we be outraged? We should be equally as outraged when others use us and in the process of using us, abuse us as it relates to who we can and cannot be. So we're still on the plantation of manipulation. There is clearly no issue that is our issue at this point, and that should be the case. Because we is free, and we have a right to participate. There's nothing stops us but us. There's no problem that is ours, that is uniquely ours and not theirs because of the way they treat us or because of the color of our skin. So if that is the case, why do we allow other folks to come in and play with our emotions, get us all riled up based on our emotions, send us some mixed messages that are invisible, and expect us, based on our past history, to respond to them? Manipulation. We're off the plantation. but we're still the victims of manipulation. But the race goes on. The race goes on, and the issues will be there. And at the end of the day, things are going to be the same. In fact, they are going to be worse for people of color coming out of the pandemic and going into the new administration. Whether the Democrats take over or the Republicans take over, it really won't matter. The issues that are important to us are not being discussed at all. But it appears that everybody has a set of issues that are uniquely theirs. I don't hear the Congressional Black Caucus. I don't hear Black elected officials articulating an agenda that needs to be passed, and if passed, will make the quality of life better for people of color. And that's great. That's great, because I can't think of one problem in our community whose solution rests with new legislation. If you know of one, hit me up in the chat box. But I can't think of one. I try to figure out what's the problem that we have today that's going to be resolved by a political action. I can't think of one. We can vote like everybody else. Registration is the same for everybody else. They talk about registration manipulation in places like Georgia, etc. But when you look at the drastic high volume of turnout, it is obvious that people in Georgia in 2022 can really participate if they want to participate, that there is no rule, no circumstance that stops them. So voter registration, voter participation is parallel for us as it is for everybody else. What issues do we have that are uniquely ours? We can live in a place that we want to live, that we can afford to buy and be comfortable in. So fair housing, access to quality fair housing is accessible to all Black folks, to all people, regardless of race, color, or creed. We can pray to our God, or we can pray to Buddha, Zoroaster, or anybody else in America, so we have freedom of religion. We can go to any school that we want to go to. They give scholarships to all of the colleges and universities in this country. And there's not a college nor a university in this country, private or state, that does not accept Black people. So what's our issue that is a collective issue that is going to be resolved by whoever is in office? I can't find one. But if you know one, let me know so that we can talk about it. But as we listen to those who campaign, they give you the impression that if one party wins, life is going to be worse than it is. And my retort to that is, if one party wins and life is going to be worse than it is, and you are in charge now and it's still bad, let's talk about that. If you're telling me, for example, that Republicans, if they win, life is going to be bad. Well, Mr. Biden, you're in office, and life is worse than it was when a Republican was in. If you're telling me that Democrats uh, are bad people and you're a Republican, I can say to you that history does not bear that out. It was a person who looks like me who was the first black president of the United States. So that demonstrated to me that color may not have the importance or the significance today that it had yesterday. My point is we've got to stop letting people at election time only give us value when they need to manipulate us in their self-interest. That prior to election time, it doesn't matter what's going on in our life. It doesn't matter how many folks we kill. It doesn't matter how many of us do not pass the test. It doesn't matter how many of us are incarcerated. It doesn't matter how many of us are born out of wedlock. It doesn't matter what is our quality of life compared to their quality of life. It does not matter until it's time for us to vote to keep them in the position that they're in. So we come into this election cycle with a bunch of handkerchief head Negroes and manipulatory white folks who will use whatever they have to use in order to convince us that the conditions that we are in are the responsibility of somebody else. And if we vote for them, everything is going to be better because it was the other folks who did it to you. And if you vote for me, I will not let them do it. Point is that as we continue to vote and get ready for Super Tuesday next week, wake up. Wake up. It is your duty and responsibility, if you so desire, to go out and vote. And if you want to vote for somebody that somebody else does not support, you're an American. And if you feel that you need to vote your conscience, then you should do that. And if others don't understand that, then so be it. To vote is a right that John Lewis and others fought, many gave their lives up for, in order for us to be able to do it. So just as an obligation to our past success, we ought to vote. But let's also vote our interests like everybody else does. Let's don't vote our emotions. Let's be selfish about how we vote and who we vote for. So examine your condition, then examine what the person who is running proposes to do legislatively to resolve the condition that you put on the table. Be deliberate. Be dogmatic. Don't be emotional. Be concerned about making sure that your vote becomes an instrument to put into place the legislative process that allows you to get to the end that you want to get to. Let's talk about the issues of the moment. Let's talk about crime. Should be an issue in our community. Who are the greatest victims of crime? Our communities. Who should be more concerned about the quality and the quantity of police protection? We should be. Who needs to have an abundance of patrolmen and others in their community simply because of the socioeconomic conditions that lay the groundwork for criminal behavior? We should be. So it would seem to me that if crime is an important issue and we are in an environment where it is committed more than any other place, it would seem to me that we would want to make sure that those who come before us talk about what they're going to do to get crime under control in our community. So why is it that controlling of crime in our community is not one of the issues that we want politicians to talk to us about? Why is it that when they talk about crime, they don't talk in Liberty City about crime? They talk in Coral Gables about crime. Why is it that we don't see the value of quality policing in our community to the extent that we will examine candidates about their positions on how they're going to increase police control and access in our community? Why is it that we only have a focus on those issues that are quote unquote socio-economic as opposed to socio-psychological? Simply because of the fact that they know that we can be emotionally manipulated in the process. What are the other issues that are important to us? Well, we're coming out of the pandemic. Our children were behind before the pandemic. They're further behind than anybody else coming out of the pandemic. And now the school board, the governor, and commissioners of education, boards of public instruction, teachers and others are now talking about the formula for catching up. Does anybody ask any of the candidates that you're voting for what is going to be the formula to be used and implemented by those who are in charge of the education delivery process for catching up? And what are you going to propose as the solutions for doing that? Seems to me that that's a question that I would want to know an answer to as we talk about coming out of the pandemic. Let's talk about inflation. We were unemployed before the pandemic. Coming out of the pandemic into inflation, everybody is unemployed. Coupled with the fact that coming out of the pandemic into inflation, we now have another new unemployed person in the unemployed line. It's called the illegal immigrant, who is now prepared to work for little or nothing simply to be able to say, I'm in America. How are we going to make sure that the unemployment process is one that is fair and equitable to all of us who are unemployed? What's going to be the proposed candidate's proposal to make sure that as we put people back to work, who goes back to work first, second, and third? How do we discriminate in that selection process? And what rules have to be refocused and re-examined in order to make that happen? Unemployment. Training. There's a lawsuit now going before the Supreme Court where students of Asian descent are saying that the institutions of higher learning are discriminating against them as they talk about the enrollment options, that students in America get quote unquote preference treatment over them. And they're saying that they are as qualified as other students and therefore the admission criteria should be uniform. They've got a political issue. so much to the extent that this is going to be argued before the Supreme Court. What is our issue about quote unquote interest into institutions of higher learning? But more importantly, what is the formula to be used by our states and others to make sure that historically Black colleges and universities survive in spite of what's going on in the other higher institutions? Shouldn't that be a legislative issue of concern as we talk about education achievement coming out of the pandemic? Point is, what is our agenda couched not in emotions, not in past rhetoric, but in future expectations? We don't have one. And I submit to you that since we don't have one, things will not get better, they will get worse. We made progress in this country from 1619 up until this point because there was a collective of us around the country, north, south, east, and west, who decided that this was our political agenda. The Voters' Rights Act would not have been passed had not Black people from all over America decided that voting privileges should be extended to all Americans, regardless of race, color, or creed. And they were willing not only to march for that to become a reality, but to die for that. Is there an issue like that in 2022? Is there an issue like that in 2022? We don't have any issues that are ours that are going to be resolved by legislative edict. They're only going to be resolved if we have an agenda. So what is our agenda? We don't have one. So we're going to participate in the election process. Everybody is going to be saying, get out the vote, go vote. Get out the vote, go vote. Everybody's going to tell us that they're going to save us if you put me in office. The Democrats are going to tell you that don't vote for those Republicans because they are racist. And the Republicans are going to tell you that don't vote for those Democrats because see where you are. And then the handkerchief head Negroes who have been able to infiltrate into both parties will simply, hopefully say, do like I tell you to do, and things will be better for you. Can't you see they're better for me? But at the end of the day, there is no issue that we all ought to be concerned about, because the issues that we have will not be resolved by political edict. There is no law that needs to be passed that will be the pathway to equity and parity with the rest of America. So voting in the election process is a right that you have as a human being, as a citizen of this community. But if you're voting in this process because of the color of your skin, and you believe that your vote is going to change something that is impacted negatively because of the color of your skin, then don't worry about it. You can vote or not vote. That's not going to be the issue. There is no issue today that is at the root of the things that we should be concerned about, whose solution rests in the body politics. Zero. If there was one, I would tell you. If there was one in 2022, then I would have been a failure. Jesse would have been a failure. Stokely would have been a failure. Rap would have been a failure. Ron Karinga would have been a failure. You name all of those who come before this conversation, who would have been a failure. There is absolutely nothing in the legislative process that needs to be done in order for us to have equity and parity with the rest of the community. If there is something, hit me up and let me know, and I'll take care of it. So let's talk about things that are important going forward for all of us. I don't care who is the president of the United States by party affiliation. I could care less whether or not it is Joe Biden or anybody else. I'm concerned about those issues that are important to my community's progress in spite of party identification. I could care less about who becomes the next governor of the state of Florida. Tonight, the debate is going on. The president is in town. He's in town to campaign for Charlie Crist, the Democratic candidate. Well, any black person who votes for Charlie Crist because they are Democrats and he is a Democrat, that's okay. But any black person who votes for Charlie Crist, who believes that Charlie Crist is dedicated and committed to doing things for black Floridians in spite of any circumstances, doesn't know Charlie Crist. So if you have a relationship with Charlie Crist as a black leader or a black person of importance, then that's one thing. But if you're just going to vote for Charlie Crist because he's a Democrat and you believe that Democrats are going to be your savior, I remind many of you who are historians of the election process in the state of Florida that when Charlie Crist ran, he was called Chain Gang Charlie because one of his solutions to incarceration of black folks was to put more black folks on the chain gang. And he had that nickname attached to him as a candidate. Was that a political ploy? Yeah, because I know Charlie. You know, and Charlie would do what he has to do in order to get elected. Is he a racist? No, he's not. But he would do what he has to do in order to get elected. And anybody who would do what they have to do in order to get elected would do whatever they have to do in order to stay in power. If that means that he will sacrifice you going in, he will sacrifice you going out. So make sure that as you talk about candidates and you talk about party affiliation, that you know something about who they are, what they are doing, what they have done, and why they are doing what they are doing. Because then you have some idea as to what you can expect them to do once they get in. So the debate is going on tonight. DeSantis and Charlie Crist got a notion that it's going to be a hot debate. Would be very surprised if DeSantis does not win the debate. Would be shocked if he does not win the gubernatorial position. So because of the fact that his record speaks for itself. So because of the fact that he appears to be one of the most popular elected officials in the United States at this point. It appears that he has a great organizational structure. It appears that he is on the right side of all the issues that we are concerned about for the village in Liberty City. And it appears that it makes all good sense for those who are concerned about the things that we're concerned about to look at him carefully. I don't endorse candidates. People can do what they want to do. Make up your own mind about who you want to vote for. But I do say that if you vote selfishly and not emotionally, if you examine the platforms, if you examine the history of the folks who are running, then I believe that you're intelligent enough to make the right decision. That decision is yours going forward, but you have a responsibility and an obligation not to be emotional, especially those of us who sit in positions of influence with others who respect us, look to us for guidance and direction, we have an obligation and a responsibility to be honest, forthright, and fair. We cannot be selfish. We cannot be afraid to talk about the things that are right as opposed to talk about the things that are popular. So I believe that folks will make up their own minds about the candidates that they're running for. If you want to know who I'm voting for, just give me a call and I'll tell you. And I'll tell you why. And I could care less about party identification. I could care less about sexuality. I could care less about where you live or where you came from, ethnicity, religion. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is your history as a human being and the believability of your character. If I know that you double-crossed some Mexicans in order to get in office and they voted for you, I can pretty well believe that you're going to double-cross me once I put you in office. So if I just make that selection based on emotion and not on fact, then I'm going to be disappointed. I also say to you that be very careful about voting for folks because somebody else tells you to vote for them. Be very careful about that. If you really want to be educated, then do what you have to do to find out everything that you can about the persons that you're voting for. Too often we allow folks just to come around at the last moment, give us a handout and say, we're going to take you to the polls and vote for Johnny Jones. He's the greatest person in the world. And we believe that that is correct because we believe the person that gave us the card. That's manipulation. That's taking advantage of your emotions. So please, when folks come in the next 7 days and they're going to be knocking on your doors and the ads are going to be coming and the words are going to be flying and the palm cards are going to be jumping up and down, tell you to vote for me, I'll set you free. Already be free. Already decide that this is why I'm going to vote for this person and this is why I'm not going to vote for that person. Be an intelligent participant in the electoral process. People die to give us the right to participate. We have an obligation, a sense of responsibility to make sure that as we participate at the highest level, that we are not going to allow people who don't care about us to come around every election cycle and seduce us into believing that now they care about us. And then once they drug us to sleep with promises that they never planned to keep, they go away. Things get worse. And then they come back the next election cycle and give you the same emotional pitch. It didn't change because somebody else wouldn't allow us to do that. Please don't allow that emotional roller coaster to continue beyond 2022. Make sure that the folks who are asking you to go vote for them have a record of keeping their word. Do your research. Be an intelligent voter. Don't be manipulated. Get off the plantation. Make sure that other folks understand that if they come to us, they must come not with proposals, but with plans that can be translated into concrete reality within a reasonable time. Don't let somebody tell you that they're going to go to the moon on your behalf and don't have a spaceship. Don't let somebody tell you that things are going to get better if you vote for me when they don't have the process that's necessary under their control to make things better. Don't just participate because somebody said, vote for me, I'll set you free. Vote for me, I'll set you free. It doesn't matter what party you belong to at all. That's philosophical for me. That's for folks who have no need for politics, so they can play the game, oh, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. It matters what the person in power can do for me if I put them in another level of power. So I don't care if you tell me that you're going to give me the moon, but if you need 5 other people to assist you in giving me the moon, then I got to figure out how I can also seduce those other 5 other people to assist you in giving me to the moon. So it's going to be important for us to talk about who dominates the control of the legislature. It's going to be important for us to determine whether or not we have a majority Democrats or majority Republicans. But we ought to be smart enough. If we had an agenda for people of color, we would be smart enough to make sure that some of us are Democrats and some of us are Republicans. And those of us who are Democrats meet with the Democrats who don't look like us. And those of us who are Republicans meet with the Republicans who don't look like us. Then all of us who look like each other, Democrats or Republicans, will meet together to make sure that the agenda for both parties is the common agenda. That if we both are concerned about economic prosperity, then we ought to make sure that both parties have economic prosperity for people of color as one of the things that they're going to do. And in that case, we win. Because if the Democrats win, then the blacks who are proponents of economic prosperity are there. And if the Republicans win, then the blacks who are proponents of economic prosperity are there. The point is that we cannot afford the luxury of being tied to one party. This is a 2-party system. Therefore, we have to be tied to both parties, but our agenda has to be a common agenda. And when the agenda is a common agenda, it does not matter which party is in power, because we are in power no matter who is in power. But we allow folks to have separate agendas. We need a common agenda. The pursuit of that agenda is through the political process. In order for that agenda to become reality, it means that we must have players in both parties. So please, all of us who are in the Democratic Party, and none of us want to be identified with the Republican Party, makes no sense. Makes no sense. We need to have identification with both parties. Makes no sense. And we need to govern ourselves so that we are attractive to both parties. We don't do that. We don't do that. So the Republicans can win without us. And then when they win without us, we say that they're racist. Well, they're not racist. They don't owe us anything. This is a political process. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. And when I win without your support, then what makes you think out of the goodness of my heart I must be concerned about the Negroes? Makes no sense. So we're going to make sure that this does not happen. Next Tuesday, we're going to make sure that we talk to you as you go to the polls and as you participate in the process. But as you prepare for the last countdown, remember Selma, Alabama. Remember 1963. That in 2022, you have an opportunity to make sure that history does not repeat itself. That we are going to participate selfishly to the fullness of our heart, and nothing will stop us but us. See you next week. Be good. Love you dearly. We rise. People keep going. I need you to
hated, degraded, and talked about most of our lives. But we've made it still standing 'cause they can't destroy what's inside. Black people keep going.